Rose Cooper's hands trembled as she clutched the letter from the Fargo Town Council, the official seal a damning stamp against her future. Spring 1875 had brought not just new life to the Dakota Territory, but a public condemnation of her very existence in the frontier town she'd called home for 3 years. Effective immediately, your position as schoolteacher is terminated, she read aloud to the empty room, her voice breaking on the final words. The reason wasn't stated explicitly, but everyone in Fargo knew the truth. The baby girl sleeping soundly in the cradle beside her bed, just 4 months old, with a father who'd promised marriage before disappearing west, leaving Rose to face the consequences alone. Outside her small rented room above the milliner's shop, Fargo continued its daily business, unaware that her world had just collapsed. Rose folded the letter carefully, as if handling it gently might somehow soften its message. She had 1 week to vacate her position in the teacher's quarters, 1 week to figure out how to support herself and little Emma in a town that had already begun to turn its back on them. The scandal had erupted gradually. First came the whispers when her condition became impossible to hide, then the parents who requested their children be moved to another class, and finally, this formal dismissal. Rose had naively believed that her record as a dedicated teacher might count for something, that the frontier town might show more forgiveness than the rigid East she'd left behind. She'd been wrong. Rose moved to the window and looked out at the bustling street below. Spring had transformed the muddy thoroughfare into a relatively passable road. Wagons rolled past, cowboys ambled by on horseback, and respectable women held their skirts above the remaining mud puddles. None looked up at her window. It was as if she'd already disappeared. A knock at her door startled her. Rose quickly wiped her tears and straightened her simple blue dress before answering. It was Mrs. Winters, the milliner, and her landlady. "I've just heard, Rose," the older woman said, her expression pinched with discomfort rather than sympathy. "Under the circumstances, I'll need you to vacate your room by week's end as well. I run a respectable establishment, you understand." Rose felt the blood drain from her face but maintained her composure. "I understand, Mrs. Winters. Thank you for the notice." After the woman left, Rose sank onto her bed, the mattress creaking under her weight. Emma stirred in her cradle, little fists waving in the air. Rose reached over to stroke her daughter's cheek, the touch centering her in the midst of chaos. "We'll be all right, little one," she whispered, though she had no idea how to make that promise true. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a mockery of Rose's circumstances. With Emma wrapped securely against her chest, Rose ventured into town with a list of possibilities clutched in her hand. Each name represented a potential employer, a slim hope for survival. By noon, the list bore nothing but crossed-out names. No one would hire her. The general store, the hotel, even the laundry, all turned her away with varying degrees of discomfort or outright disdain. "A woman of your situation," the hotel manager had said delicately, "would upset our guests." Rose stood in the middle of the street, the Dakota sun beating down on her bonnet, feeling utterly alone in the crowded thoroughfare. Emma fussed against her chest, hungry and uncomfortable in the heat. "Miss Cooper?" The voice came from behind her. Rose turned to find Nathaniel Yates, a cowboy who occasionally rode through town with cattle herds bound for the railroad. They'd exchanged pleasantries a few times when he'd stopped at the schoolhouse to deliver books his boss had donated. "Mr. Yates," she acknowledged, trying to maintain her dignity despite the tears threatening to fall. He stood before her, tall and lean in his worn riding clothes, hat in hand. His sun-bronzed face was framed by dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and his eyes, a startling clear blue, regarded her with none of the judgment she'd faced all morning. "I heard about your situation," he said directly. "Word travels fast in Fargo." Rose stiffened. "Indeed it does." Nathaniel glanced at the bundle against her chest. "Your little one looks warm. Perhaps you'd allow me to buy you both lunch at the cafe. It's cooler inside." Rose hesitated. Being seen with a man would only fuel more gossip, but Emma needed to be fed and cooled down, and Rose herself hadn't eaten since the previous evening. "That's kind, but unnecessary," she began, please," he interrupted. "No strings attached, just lunch." Something in his straightforward gaze convinced her. "Thank you, Mr. Yates. That would be appreciated." They walked to the small cafe at the end of Main Street, painfully aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Inside, the proprietor frowned at Rose, but seated them at Nathaniel's insistence. "Coffee?" the waitress asked Nathaniel, pointedly ignoring Rose. "2 coffees," he corrected firmly. "And whatever lunch special you're serving today for both of us." The woman's lips thinned, but she nodded curtly. "You don't need to do that," Rose said quietly after the waitress left. "Fight my battles for me." "I'm not fighting anything," Nathaniel replied. "Just ordering lunch." Emma began to fuss more insistently, and Rose adjusted her shawl to provide privacy as she nursed her daughter. She felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I can step outside if you'd prefer privacy," Nathaniel offered. "No, it's fine. The shawl works well enough." Rose paused. "Though I appreciate the consideration. It's been in short supply lately." Their coffee arrived, delivered with a clatter that suggested the waitress's disapproval. Nathaniel seemed unperturbed. "I understand you're looking for work," he said, adding sugar to his cup. Rose looked up sharply. "News truly does travel quickly." "It's a small town." He took a sip of his coffee. "I may have a solution if you're willing to hear me out." Hope fluttered in Rose's chest, but experience had taught her caution. "What kind of solution?" "I work for the Circle Y Ranch, about 20 miles west of here. The owner, Jacob Yates, my uncle, is looking for someone to tutor his children. His wife passed 2 years ago, and he's been trying to keep up their education, but with 3 children and a ranch to run, he's falling behind." Rose tilted her head. "And he'd hire me, knowing my circumstances?" Nathaniel met her gaze directly. "My uncle judges people by their character and abilities, not by gossip. You were the schoolteacher here for what, 3 years? Nearly 4. Then you're qualified. The position includes room and board in the main house. It's not luxury, but it's comfortable. There's plenty of space for you and your daughter." Rose considered his words carefully. "It sounds too good to be true, Mr. Yates." "Nathaniel, please." He leaned forward. "It's not paradise, Miss Cooper. It's hard work. The children can be a handful. Mary is 12 and thinks she's grown. Thomas is 10 and would rather be riding than reading, and little Sarah is 7 and sweet but stubborn. The ranch is isolated, especially in winter. But you'd be respected there." The waitress returned with their meal's beef stew with fresh bread. Rose adjusted Emma to her shoulder to burp her before beginning her own meal. "May I ask why you're helping me?" Rose questioned, breaking off a piece of bread. Nathaniel considered for a moment. "I've watched this town turn against you these past months. I've seen how you've held your head high despite it all. When I look at you, Miss Cooper, I don't see the scandal everyone's whispering about." "What do you see then?" she asked quietly. "I see a mother, not a mistake," he said simply. "A woman doing her best in difficult circumstances. That deserves respect, not condemnation." His words brought unexpected tears to Rose's eyes. She blinked them away quickly. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." They finished their meal discussing practical matters when he could take her to the ranch, what belongings she should bring, what the children were currently studying. By the time they stepped back onto the street, Rose had made her decision. "If your uncle is willing to give me a chance, I accept the position," she said. Nathaniel smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Good. I'll return in 3 days to collect you and your things. Will that give you enough time to settle your affairs here?" Rose thought of her few possessions, the people who'd turned their backs on her, the empty future Fargo now offered. "Yes, that's more than sufficient." As they parted ways, Rose felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Whether this opportunity was the answer to her prayers or simply a temporary respite, she couldn't say. But it was a chance, and she would grasp it with both hands. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity. Rose packed her books, clothes, and the few keepsakes she'd brought from her family home in Pennsylvania. She wrote letters to her parents and sister, explaining her new position without detailing the circumstances that had led to it. They had reluctantly accepted Emma's existence in their letters, though their disappointment had been evident in every carefully chosen word. On her final evening in Fargo, Rose walked through the town one last time, Emma bundled against the cooling spring air. She passed the schoolhouse where she'd taught, the church where she'd been welcome until her pregnancy showed, the shops where she'd once been greeted with friendly smiles. No one acknowledged her now, save for a few children who waved before being hushed by their parents. "Remember this, Emma," she whispered to her sleeping daughter. "Remember that we survived this place, and we'll be stronger for it." Dawn broke clear and cool on the day of their departure. Rose was waiting with her 2 trunks and Emma's basket when Nathaniel arrived with a wagon. He loaded her belongings efficiently while Rose secured Emma in a makeshift sling for the journey. As they pulled away from Fargo, Rose didn't look back. Whatever lay ahead at Circle Y Ranch had to be better than the cold shoulders and judgment they were leaving behind. The journey west took most of the day. They traveled across rolling prairie, the spring grass already greening under the Dakota sun. Nathaniel pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the region, his deep voice a comforting counterpoint to the steady clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels. "My uncle came here 15 years ago," he explained as they stopped to rest the horses and feed Emma. "Started with just 100 acres and a dozen cattle. Now the Circle Y runs over 5,000 acres with 800 head. "That's impressive," Rose remarked, gently rocking Emma after nursing her. "And you, have you always worked for your uncle?" A shadow crossed Nathaniel's face. "No. I rode with the cavalry for a while after the war. Came to work for my uncle 3 years ago when I'd had enough of fighting." There was clearly more to the story, but Rose didn't press. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred not to discuss. She understood that better than most. By late afternoon, they crested a small rise, and Nathaniel pointed ahead. "There it is, Circle Y." Rose leaned forward, taking in her first view of what would be her new home. The ranch spread across a green valley, centered around a large 2-story house built of solid timber. Several outbuildings and corrals surrounded it, with bunkhouses set a respectful distance away. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and horses grazed in a nearby field. "It's larger than I expected," Rose admitted. "Uncle Jacob believes in building to last," Nathaniel replied with evident pride. "The main house has 6 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and even indoor plumbing. Aunt Catherine insisted on that before they built." As they approached, 3 children raced from the house, followed by a tall man with salt and pepper hair and the same blue eyes as Nathaniel. The children reached the wagon first, bouncing with curiosity. "Is this our new teacher?" the oldest girl asked, eyeing Rose with unconcealed interest. "Father said you were bringing her today." "Mary, mind your manners," Jacob Yates chided as he approached. He reached up to help Rose down from the wagon. "Welcome to Circle Y, Miss Cooper. I'm Jacob Yates." "Thank you for having us, Mr. Yates," Rose replied, adjusting Emma in her arms. The children stared openly at the baby. The youngest, who must be Sarah, stepped forward. "Is that your baby? Can I see her?" Rose knelt carefully to show Emma to the girl. "This is Emma. She's 4 months old." "She's so tiny," Sarah whispered, gently touching Emma's hand. Jacob cleared his throat. "Children, help Mr. Fredericks unload Miss Cooper's things. Nathaniel, show her to her room so she can get settled before supper." The main house was just as impressive inside as out. Polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books spoke of prosperity tempered with practical frontier sensibility. Rose's room was on the 2nd floor, spacious with a large bed, a cradle that Jacob explained had been his children's, a dresser, and a small desk by the window that overlooked the corral. "I thought you might appreciate the desk for lesson planning," Nathaniel explained as he set down her trunks. "Uncle had it brought up from his study." "It's perfect," Rose said, genuinely touched by the consideration. "Thank you." After Nathaniel left, Rose sat on the bed, Emma cradled in her arms. For the first time in months, she felt something like peace. The Yates family had welcomed her without judgment or suspicion. Whether that would last remained to be seen, But for now, she would accept this moment of grace. Supper that evening was a boisterous affair. The children peppered Rose with questions about Fargo, her teaching experience, and especially about Emma. Jacob occasionally reined in their curiosity, but he seemed pleased by their interest. Nathaniel was quieter, observing more than participating, but Rose often caught his gaze on her, thoughtful and assessing. After the meal, Jacob invited Rose to his study to discuss the children's education. The room was lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered with ranch paperwork and ledgers. "I apologize for the mess," he said, clearing space for her to sit. "Ranching generates more paperwork than cattle some days." "No need to apologize. I appreciate you taking the time to discuss the children's education." Rose settled into the chair, grateful that Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper Jacob had introduced earlier, had offered to watch Emma for a while. Jacob leaned against his desk. "I'll be direct, Miss Cooper. Nathaniel told me about your situation in Fargo." Rose tensed. "I see. No need for concern. I'm not one to judge others harshly. My Catherine, God rest her soul, taught me better than that." His expression softened with memory. "She always said a person should be measured by their actions, not their circumstances. Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman." "The wisest," Jacob straightened. "Now, about the children. They've been without proper schooling since Catherine passed. I've done my best, but ranching doesn't leave much time for Latin and mathematics." They spent the next hour discussing the children's abilities and needs. By the time Rose returned to her room, she had a clear plan for beginning lessons the next day. Mrs. Winters had already settled Emma in the cradle and left a pitcher of fresh water on the dresser. Rose stood by the window, looking out at the ranch now bathed in moonlight. Lanterns glowed in the bunkhouse windows, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called into the night. This wild, beautiful place was so different from the prim streets of Pennsylvania where she'd grown up, or the judgmental confines of Fargo where she'd fallen from grace. Perhaps here, on this remote ranch, she and Emma might find not just sanctuary, but a true home. As the days passed, Rose settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She taught the children each morning in a bright room Jacob had converted into a schoolroom, complete with a blackboard and 3 proper desks. The children, though behind in their studies, proved eager learners now that they had a dedicated teacher. In the afternoons, Rose helped with household tasks while the children attended to their ranch chores. Mrs. Winters, initially standoffish, gradually warmed to Rose as they worked side by side in the kitchen or garden. The older woman had her own sad history. Rose learned a daughter lost to childbirth, a son killed in the war. Perhaps this shared understanding of loss created a bridge between them. Emma thrived in the ranch environment. When Rose was teaching, Mrs. Winters, or one of the women from the nearby homesteads who came to help with laundry, would watch her. As spring turned to summer, Emma grew plumper and more alert, fascinating the Yates children who treated her like a living doll. Of Nathaniel, Rose saw little during those first weeks. He was often away checking fence lines, moving cattle, or traveling to neighboring ranches on Jacob's business. When their paths did cross, usually at supper or on Sunday afternoons when the ranch observed a day of rest, their conversations remained polite but distant. Rose sensed he was watching her, evaluating her integration into ranch life, but his thoughts remained his own. One evening in late June, Rose sat on the front porch after the children had gone to bed, enjoying the cooler air and the symphony of prairie insects. Emma was asleep in her lap, having refused to settle in her cradle. The baby was teething, fussy, and uncomfortable despite Rose's best efforts to soothe her. The sound of hoofbeats approached, and moments later, Nathaniel rode into the yard. He dismounted smoothly, patting his horse's neck before leading it toward the barn. As he passed the porch, he noticed Rose and changed direction. "Evening, Miss Cooper," he said, removing his hat. "You're up late." "Emma's teething," Rose explained. "She's more comfortable out here with the breeze." Nathaniel leaned against the porch railing, his tall frame silhouetted against the star-filled sky. "My mother used to rub whiskey on our gums when we were teething, swore by it." Rose smiled. Mrs. Winter suggested the same. I tried it this afternoon, but I'm not convinced it helped much. Poor little thing. His voice softened as he looked at the sleeping infant. May I? He gestured to the empty chair beside her. Of course. He settled into the chair with a weary sigh. Up close, Rose could see the fatigue etched on his face, the layer of trail dust on his clothes. You look exhausted, she observed. Have you eaten? Not since noon. I wanted to finish repairing that north fence before dark. There's stew keeping warm in the kitchen. I could bring you a bowl. He waved off her offer. Don't trouble yourself. I'll get some after I've washed up. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds Emma's occasional whimper and the distant lowing of cattle. The children are doing well with their studies, Rose said finally. Your uncle seems pleased, Nathaniel nodded. He is. He mentions it often. Thomas actually discussed his history lesson with me last week, something he's never done before. He has a quick mind. All three do in different ways. Uncle Jacob made the right choice in hiring you. Nathaniel turned to look at her directly. Are you happy here, Miss Cooper? The question caught Rose off guard. Happy? Yes, I believe I am. The children are wonderful, and your uncle has been nothing but kind. And the isolation. You don't miss town life? Rose thought of Fargo, of the whispers and cold shoulders. Not at all. The ranch feels safer. Nathaniel seemed to understand her meaning. People can be cruel without cause. Yes, they can. Rose adjusted Emma as the baby stirred. But kindness exists too, often where you least expect it. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Both had known hardship, though in different forms. Both understood what it meant to rebuild from ashes. The moment was broken when Emma woke fully, her cries piercing the night air. I should take her inside, Rose said, rising from her chair. Nathaniel stood quickly. Of course. Good night, Miss Cooper. Good night, Mr. Yates. And thank you again for everything you've done for us. He nodded once, then turned toward the bunkhouse, his long stride carrying him quickly into the darkness. As summer progressed, Rose found herself watching for Nathaniel more often, a fact she tried to hide even from herself. There was something compelling about the quiet cowboy, something that went beyond gratitude for his initial kindness. She observed how gently he spoke to his horses, how patiently he taught Thomas to rope, how respectfully he treated the ranch hands regardless of their background. In a world where many men wore their strength like a weapon, Nathaniel carried his with quiet dignity. July brought scorching heat to the prairie. Lessons moved to the early morning hours before the schoolroom became unbearably hot. Afternoons were spent near the creek that ran through the property, where the children could splash in the shallow water under Rose's supervision while Emma napped in the shade. On one such afternoon, Rose sat beneath a cottonwood tree, mending one of Mary's dresses while the children played. Emma slept on a blanket beside her, her chubby limbs sprawled in abandon. The peaceful scene was interrupted by Mary's excited shout. "Uncle Nate, come swimming!" Rose looked up to see Nathaniel approaching on horseback. He dismounted and tethered his horse to a nearby tree. "I'm not dressed for swimming," he called back, but walked toward the creek anyway. Mary was undeterred. "You can roll up your pants. It's too hot to stay dry." Thomas and Sarah added their pleas, and soon Nathaniel was sitting on the creek bank, pants rolled to his knees, feet in the cool water as the children splashed around him. Rose continued her mending, stealing occasional glances at the scene. There was something deeply appealing about this strong man entertaining children with such good humor. After a while, the children tired of swimming and scattered to explore. Mary to collect wildflowers, Thomas to investigate a fallen log for insects, and Sarah to chase butterflies. Nathaniel made his way to Rose's shady spot and sat nearby, careful not to disturb Emma. "The children have taken to you," Rose observed, setting aside her mending. "I've known them since they were born," Nathaniel replied. "Before I left for the war, I lived here, helped my uncle build the ranch. When I came back, He trailed off, his expression clouding. It was different? Rose guessed. He nodded. I was different. The war changes a man. For a while I couldn't settle anywhere. Rode with the cavalry, then worked cattle drives, anything to keep moving. What brought you back? Catherine, my aunt, was sick. Uncle Jacob needed help with the ranch and the children. I meant to stay just until things stabilized, but after she passed, he shrugged. The children needed stability, and I found I needed roots again. Rose understood the feeling. Sometimes the place we need to be isn't where we expected. Like you teaching on a cattle ranch instead of in a proper town school? There was a hint of a smile in his voice. Exactly like that, Rose returned his smile. Though I'm finding I prefer my students here. They ask more interesting questions. Such as? Yesterday, Thomas wanted to know if Romans wore underwear beneath their togas. We had quite the historical discussion about ancient garments. Nathaniel laughed, the sound rich and unexpected. It transformed his face, erasing years and worry. Rose found herself laughing too, the simple joy of the moment washing away the lingering shadows of her own past. Emma woke at the sound, blinking up at the dappled sunlight through the leaves. Before Rose could move, Nathaniel leaned over. Hello there, little miss, he said softly. Did we wake you with our foolishness? Emma responded with a toothless smile and a gurgle, her tiny hands reaching up. Without hesitation, Nathaniel offered his finger, which Emma promptly grasped. She has a strong grip, he noted, genuine admiration in his voice. She's determined, Rose agreed. Even at this age, she knows what she wants and goes after it. Like her mother. The simple statement, delivered without flourish, warmed Rose's heart. Few people had ever seen determination in her actions. Most saw only shame and poor choices. Thank you for saying that, she said quietly. Nathaniel met her eyes. I only speak the truth, Miss Cooper. Coming here, starting over. Facing whatever lies ahead with courage that takes strength many don't possess. The intensity of his gaze made Rose's heart quicken. There was admiration there, yes, but something more, a spark of interest that mirrored her own growing feelings. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She'd trusted a man's interest once before, with disastrous consequences. She looked away first, focusing on Emma, who was still happily clutching Nathaniel's finger. We should head back soon. It'll be time to start supper. Nathaniel nodded and gently reclaimed his finger from Emma's grasp. I'll round up the children. As he walked away, Rose pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. She was being foolish, reading too much into a friendly conversation. A man like Nathaniel Yates, respected, established, unburdened by scandal, wouldn't seriously consider a fallen woman with another man's child. The kindness he showed was just that kindness, nothing more. She would do well to remember it. August brought the cattle roundup, a busy time when every hand on the ranch worked from dawn to dusk, gathering scattered herds, branding calves, and preparing for fall sales. Rose's days grew longer as she took on additional household responsibilities, while Mrs. Winters cooked for the expanded crew of cowboys, hired temporarily for the roundup. Despite the increased workload, Rose found herself enjoying the energy and purpose that filled the ranch. There was something satisfying about being part of this larger effort, about contributing to the success of the place that had given her and Emma refuge. The children's lessons continued, though on a reduced schedule. Often they would complete their bookwork in the morning, then join Rose in practical lessons helping with the garden harvest, learning to preserve vegetables, or assisting with the endless laundry generated by the roundup crew. Rose saw Nathaniel rarely during this period. He left before dawn each day and returned after dark, sometimes sleeping in the line camps rather than riding back to the ranch house. When their paths did cross, usually at Sunday dinner, he was too exhausted for more than polite conversation. One evening in late August, Rose sat on the porch after supper, Emma asleep in her arms. The roundup was nearly complete, and a sense of accomplishment permeated the ranch. Tomorrow would bring the final tally of calves and cattle, determining the ranch's prosperity for the coming year. The sound of approaching horses drew Rose's attention. Jacob and Nathaniel rode into the yard, deep in conversation. They dismounted, and Jacob headed toward the house, while Nathaniel led both horses to the barn. As Jacob climbed the porch steps, his face broke into a wide smile. "Good evening, Miss Cooper," he greeted her. "You're enjoying the cooler air." "Indeed. And Emma sleeps better out here after these hot days." Jacob settled into the chair beside her. "She's growing like a weed. Hard to believe she was that tiny bundle you brought here in spring." "Time passes quickly," Rose agreed. "Your children are growing too. Mary asked yesterday if she might start wearing her hair up like a young lady." Jacob groaned. "Lord help me. Seems like yesterday she was Sarah's age, following me around the corral asking about every horse." He sighed. "Catherine would know what to do about these things. I'm at a loss with 3 growing children." "You're doing wonderfully with them, Mr. Yates. They're kind, respectful, eager to learn that reflects well on your guidance. And yours these past months." Jacob's expression grew serious. "Which brings me to something I've been meaning to discuss with you. With fall coming, I'd like to formalize your position here permanently. The children are thriving under your care, and you've become a valuable part of our household." Rose felt a wave of relief. She'd worried about what would happen after the initial arrangement ended. "I'm honored, Mr. Yates. I'd be delighted to stay on." "Excellent," Jacob smiled broadly. "We'll sort out the details tomorrow. For now, I'm going to check on the children before they're asleep." He rose and headed inside, leaving Rose with her thoughts. Permanent employment, security for herself and Emma, the knowledge that they had found not just refuge, but a home. Rose closed her eyes in silent gratitude. Good news? She opened her eyes to find Nathaniel standing at the bottom of the porch steps, hat in hand. The setting sun cast golden light across his features, highlighting cheekbones sharpened by weeks of hard work. "Your uncle has asked me to stay on permanently," Rose replied, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. Nathaniel's face broke into a genuine smile. "I'm glad to hear it. The ranch wouldn't be the same without you and Emma now." He climbed the steps and sat in the chair his uncle had vacated. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and purple. "The roundup went well?" Rose asked finally. "Better than expected. The spring calving was good, and we lost fewer than usual to predators. Uncle Jacob's pleased." "As he should be. Everyone worked incredibly hard." Nathaniel turned to look at her directly. "Including you. Uncle Jacob mentioned how much you've taken on with Mrs. Winters, busy cooking for the crew." Rose shrugged. "It seems little enough compared to what everyone else has been doing. Don't diminish your contribution. A ranch is more than just cattle and cowboys. It's a home as well." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "You've made it more of one than it's been in a long while." The compliment brought warmth to Rose's cheeks. "Thank you. That means a great deal." Emma stirred in Rose's arms, her little face scrunching as she woke. Nathaniel watched as Rose soothed the baby, speaking in soft tones until Emma settled again. "You're good with her," he observed. "Patient. She makes it easy. She has a sweet nature." Rose smiled down at her daughter. "Though I expect that will change once she's mobile. Mrs. Winters says she'll be crawling before we know it." "Mrs. Winters is usually right about such things." Nathaniel leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Rose, Miss Cooper, may I speak plainly?" The shift in tone and his use of her first name caught Rose's attention. "Of course. These past months, watching you with Emma, with the children, seeing how you've handled all the challenges thrown your way, I've developed a great admiration for you." Rose felt her pulse quicken. "Mr. Yates." "Nathaniel, please." He met her gaze directly. "I'm not a man given to flowery speech or grand gestures, but I believe in speaking truth plainly. The truth is, I care for you, more than I expected to, more than might be proper to admit so directly." Rose sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break this moment that seemed both impossible and inevitable. "I don't expect anything," Nathaniel continued. "I understand your situation is complicated. You've been hurt, betrayed by someone who should have honored his promises. I wouldn't presume to— Nathaniel, Rose interrupted softly. I care for you too. The simple admission hung between them, powerful in its honesty. Nathaniel's expression softened. I'm glad to hear that, but I don't want to rush you or pressure you in any way. I just wanted you to know where I stand. I appreciate your directness, Rose adjusted Emma in her arms, and your understanding. You're right that my past makes me cautious, but I'm not afraid of what I feel for you. Good. He smiled, the expression transforming his face. Then perhaps we can take our time, see where this leads? I'd like that very much. As twilight deepened around them, they talked of simpler things, the weather, the fall cattle drive to the railroad, the harvest from the kitchen garden. Yet beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of newfound understanding, the beginning of something neither had expected to find on this remote Dakota ranch. As summer yielded to fall, Rose and Nathaniel's relationship developed gradually, built on shared values and growing trust rather than passionate declarations. They were both private people by nature, careful with their feelings after past hurts. Yet the ranch household soon noticed the change between them, the lingering glances, the way Nathaniel would seek out Rose's company in the evenings, the smile that lit her face when he entered a room. Jacob Yates observed the developing attachment with quiet approval. One evening in early October, after Nathaniel had helped Rose bring in the last of the garden harvest, Jacob called his nephew into his study. Your intentions toward Miss Cooper, Jacob began without preamble. Are they honorable? Nathaniel met his uncle's gaze steadily. Completely. Good. She's a fine woman who's been dealt a difficult hand. She deserves nothing less than complete respect. I agree entirely, Nathaniel replied. I care for her deeply, Uncle Jacob. For Emma, too. Jacob nodded, satisfied. Then you have my blessing, for whatever that's worth. Just remember that she may need time. Trust doesn't come easy after betrayal. I understand. I'm in no rush. With the harvest complete and winter approaching, the rhythm of ranch life shifted. Cattle were moved to protected pastures, hay was stacked for winter feeding, and the ranch buildings were prepared for the harsh Dakota winter. The children's lessons moved entirely indoors, focusing on literature and mathematics during the long hours when outdoor activities would be limited. On a crisp November afternoon, Rose bundled Emma against the chill and walked to the small cemetery on a rise behind the ranch house. She'd learned from Mary that Catherine Yates was buried there, along with Jacob's parents and a baby born between Thomas and Sarah who had lived only a few days. Rose laid a small bouquet of late-blooming asters on Catherine's grave. Thank you, she said softly to the simple marker, for raising your children with such kindness, for creating this home that sheltered us when we needed it most. She would have liked you. Rose turned to find Nathaniel standing a respectful distance away. I didn't mean to intrude, he said. I saw you walking this way. You're not intruding. Rose gestured for him to join her. I wanted to pay my respects. Mary talks about her mother often. Nathaniel moved to stand beside her. Aunt Catherine was remarkable, strong but gentle, educated but practical. She could deliver a calf, quote Shakespeare, and bake the best apple pie in the territory, all in the same day. She sounds wonderful. She was. Nathaniel looked down at the grave. She saved me in many ways. After the war, when I was lost in dark memories, she brought me back. Made me talk about it when I didn't want to. Let me be silent when I needed that. She understood that healing isn't straightforward. Rose slipped her hand into his, a gesture of comfort. She sounds wise. She was. He squeezed her hand gently. She would have stood up for you in Fargo, faced down the entire town council if necessary. She had no patience for hypocrisy or cruelty masked as morality. They stood in silence for a moment, the prairie wind rustling the dry grass around them. Emma, secure in her bundling, watched the swaying grasses with fascination. Would you walk with me? Nathaniel asked finally. There's something I'd like to show you, Rose nodded, and they made their way along a well-worn path that led away from the cemetery toward a small rise. As they crested the hill, a view opened before them. The ranch spread out below, the house and outbuildings neat and solid against the vast prairie. "My grandfather homesteaded this land," Nathaniel said. "Built a sod house right where we're standing. Uncle Jacob helped me clear it away years ago, but the foundation stones are still here." He pointed to a rectangular outline of weathered rocks. "When Uncle Jacob and Aunt Catherine married, they built the first part of the ranch house, just 4 rooms then. I remember helping raise the walls as a boy." Rose listened, understanding that he was sharing not just history, but something of himself, his roots, his connection to this land. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "All of it, what your family has built here." Nathaniel turned to face her, his expression serious. "Rose, I've been thinking a lot about family, about building something that lasts." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Have you?" "Yes." He took both her hands in his. "I know we haven't known each other long, by some standards, but out here we measure things differently. Time has a different quality. In these months I've seen your strength, your kindness, your determination. I know your heart, Rose Cooper, and I love what I've found there." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. "Nathaniel, please, let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Rose. I love Emma too, as if she were my own. I want to build a life with both of you. I want to be a husband to you and a father to her, if you'll have me." The sincerity in his blue eyes left no room for doubt. This was no rash proposal, but a carefully considered commitment from a man who chose his words with precision. "Are you certain?" Rose asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My past is part of what made you the woman you are today," Nathaniel interrupted gently. "The woman I love. I don't care about Fargo's gossip or anyone else's judgment. I see you, Rose, a mother, not a mistake, a woman of courage and grace, my future if you'll share it." Emma chose that moment to babble happily, reaching out a mittened hand toward Nathaniel. Both adults laughed, the sound bright in the clear air. "I think she's voting yes," Nathaniel said, his smile hopeful. Rose looked from her daughter to this man who had rescued them from despair, who had seen value where others saw only scandal, who offered not just security, but true partnership. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes to all of it, Nathaniel. I love you too." His kiss was gentle but full of promise, a seal on words that both knew would be honored. When they parted, Rose leaned her forehead against his, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her from disgrace in Fargo to this moment of perfect belonging. "When?" she asked simply. "Christmas?" he suggested. "Uncle Jacob could ride to town for the minister. Just family here at the ranch," Rose nodded. "Christmas would be perfect." As they walked back to the ranch house, Emma nestled between them. Rose marveled at the turns life could take. 6 months ago, she'd faced a future of rejection and struggle. Now, she walked toward a home filled with love, acceptance, and promise. The news of their engagement was met with joy by the entire household. The children were especially excited. Mary immediately began planning decorations for the Christmas wedding, while Thomas solemnly told Nathaniel he approved of his choice. Sarah simply hugged Rose and whispered, "Does this mean Emma will be my real sister now?" "Yes," Rose assured her, "and you'll be her big sister, to teach her all sorts of things as she grows." As December arrived with its short days and long nights, preparations for both Christmas and the wedding occupied the ranch. Rose sewed a new dress of deep blue wool, trimmed with lace that Mrs. Winters produced from her own keepsake box. The housekeeper, now fully won over, insisted on baking the wedding cake herself. "Never thought I'd be baking another wedding cake in this house," she confided to Rose one afternoon as they prepared supper. "After Mrs. Yates passed, the house lost its heart. You've brought it back, you and that baby." The simple words meant more to Rose than elaborate compliments. Mrs. Winters was not given to sentimentality. Her approval was hard-earned and genuine. 2 weeks before Christmas, Jacob rode to town for supplies and to arrange for the minister's visit. He returned with not only the promised clergyman, but also an unexpected package, a letter addressed to Rose, forwarded from Fargo. Rose opened it that evening in the privacy of her room, recognizing her sister Elizabeth's handwriting. The letter contained surprising news: their parents had passed away within weeks of each other, leaving their modest home and possessions to their 2 daughters. Elizabeth writes that she and her husband have no desire to keep the house, Rose told Nathaniel the next day as they walked along the frozen creek. They're established in New York and have no plans to return to Pennsylvania. She suggests selling the property and dividing the proceeds. How do you feel about that? Nathaniel asked. Rose considered the question carefully. Conflicted. That house holds my childhood, both good and difficult memories, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. She looked around at the winter bare landscape, beautiful in its stark simplicity. This does, Nathaniel nodded. Then perhaps selling is the right choice. The money could provide security for Emma's future. Yes, that seems wise. Rose squeezed his hand. Elizabeth also wrote something else. She wants to visit in the spring to meet Emma. And you? Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. Does that mean she approves of our marriage? She says she's cautiously optimistic, which for Elizabeth is practically a ringing endorsement. Rose smiled. She was always more sympathetic than our parents. When I wrote to her about Emma, she sent baby clothes and kind words when our parents could barely acknowledge her existence. Then I look forward to meeting her. Nathaniel paused, then added, Family's important, Rose. I'm glad you'll have your sister in your life again. The day before Christmas Eve brought a heavy snowfall, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white. The children spent the morning sledding on the gentle slope behind the house, their laughter carrying on the crisp air. By afternoon, the storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine landscape under brilliant blue skies. Rose stood on the porch watching the children play, Emma bundled warmly in her arms. The baby was fascinated by the snow, reaching out to touch the flakes that occasionally drifted down from overloaded branches. Beautiful, isn't it? Nathaniel said, joining them on the porch. The first heavy snow always makes the ranch look like something from a storybook. It does, Rose agreed, though I imagine it looks less magical when you're moving cattle in it. Nathaniel chuckled. True enough, but today we can just enjoy it. He reached for Emma. May I? Rose handed over the baby, who went willingly into Nathaniel's arms. In the months since their arrival at Circle Y, Emma had developed a strong attachment to Nathaniel. She would track him with her eyes when he was in the room and reach for him whenever he came near. I thought we might take a sleigh ride this afternoon, Nathaniel said, bouncing Emma gently. The children have been asking, and Uncle Jacob says the snow is perfect for it. That sounds wonderful, Rose replied. I've never been on a sleigh before. Then we must remedy that immediately. Nathaniel's eyes twinkled. Every proper Dakota lady should experience at least one sleigh ride. The sleigh was a beautiful conveyance, painted red with elegant curves and brass fittings that gleamed in the winter sun. Jacob hitched 2 of his best horses to it, their harnesses adorned with small bells that jingled merrily with every movement. The entire household packed into the sleigh, Jacob driving, Mrs. Winters and the children in the middle bench, and Rose and Nathaniel with Emma in the back. Wrapped in thick blankets with hot bricks at their feet, they set off across the snow-covered prairie. The sleigh glided smoothly over the pristine surface, the only sounds the jingling of the bells, the soft thud of the horses' hooves, and the occasional exclamation of delight from the children. Rose leaned against Nathaniel, savoring the beauty of the moment, the vast white landscape, the clear blue sky, the warmth of family surrounding them. Happy? Nathaniel asked softly. Rose looked up at him, this man who had changed her life with a simple act of kindness and a refusal to judge. Completely, she whispered, more than I ever imagined possible. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold. The minister had arrived the previous evening, staying in the guest room usually reserved for cattle buyers or distant relatives. After breakfast, The household busied itself with final preparations for both Christmas and the wedding scheduled for that afternoon. Rose dressed in her new blue gown with Mrs. Winter's help, her hands trembling slightly with emotion as she fastened the small pearl buttons at her throat. Emma, dressed in a white gown that had once belonged to Sarah, watched from her cradle, occasionally babbling happily. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Winter said, adjusting the lace at Rose's collar. "Like a proper bride." The words brought unexpected tears to Rose's eyes. A year ago she'd believed no man would ever call her bride, that Emma's birth had sealed her fate as an outcast. Now she stood prepared to marry a man who loved both her and her daughter unreservedly. "Thank you," Rose said, squeezing the older woman's hand, "for everything." "None of that now," Mrs. Winters replied briskly, though her own eyes were suspiciously bright. "You'll ruin your complexion with tears. Now, let me take Emma downstairs. Mary's waiting to escort you down when it's time." The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. The ranch's main room had been transformed with pine boughs, candles, and ribbon. A small table served as an altar, covered with Catherine's finest linen tablecloth and bearing the family Bible. As Mary led her down the stairs, Rose saw Nathaniel waiting beside the minister, his expression one of pure joy as he watched her approach. Jacob stood beside him as best man, while Thomas held Emma with surprising gentleness. The vows were traditional love, honor, cherish, but spoken with a sincerity that filled the room. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nathaniel's kiss was both tender and full of promise. "Mrs. Yates," he whispered as they parted. "Mr. Yates," she replied, the new name fitting perfectly. The celebration that followed was joyful, yet intimate. A special supper prepared by Mrs. Winters, the wedding cake decorated with crystallized flowers she'd preserved from the summer garden, songs around the piano that Jacob had ordered years ago for Catherine. As evening deepened, the children were sent to bed despite their protests. Jacob tactfully retired to his study with a good book, and Mrs. Winters disappeared to her own quarters. Finally, Rose and Nathaniel were alone in the sitting room, the fire casting a warm glow over their first moments of privacy as husband and wife. "Happy, Mrs. Yates?" Nathaniel asked, drawing her close. "Deliriously," Rose replied honestly, "though I keep thinking I'll wake and find this all a dream." "Not a dream." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Just a new beginning." Later that night, as snow began to fall again outside their window, Rose lay in Nathaniel's arms, marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the shame and rejection of Fargo to the complete acceptance and love she'd found at Circle Y Ranch, it seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking?" Nathaniel asked softly, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "About how life can change so completely," she replied. "If you hadn't been in Fargo that day, if you hadn't spoken to me, I believe we would have found each other somehow," he said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be." Rose smiled at his uncharacteristic romanticism. "Perhaps you're right." "I know I am." He pulled her closer. "You and Emma were always meant to be part of this family. The journey might have been difficult, but the destination was worth it." As Rose drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, she silently agreed. Every tear, every moment of shame, every struggle had led her here to this man, this family, this life filled with love and possibility. The town had shamed her for having a child alone, but Nathaniel had seen a mother, not a mistake. And in seeing her truly, he had helped her find not just refuge, but home. Spring 1880. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Circle Y Ranch house, illuminating the busy breakfast table. 5-year-old Emma carefully poured milk into her younger brother's cup, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "Thank you, Emmy," 3-year-old James said solemnly. "You're welcome," she replied with the dignity of an older sister. Rose watched the exchange with a full heart as she nursed their newest addition, 2-month-old William. Beside her, Nathaniel enjoyed his coffee, occasionally reaching over to brush a hand against hers, a small gesture of affection that had become habit over their 5 years of marriage. The ranch had prospered during those years, expanding its boundaries and its herds. The original Yates children were growing up, Mary, now 17, and courted by a neighboring rancher's son, Thomas, 15 and nearly as tall as his father, Sarah, 12, and still as sweet-natured as ever. Jacob, now sporting a full white beard, entered the dining room with the morning mail. "Letter for you, Rose," he said, handing her an envelope. "From your sister, looks like." Rose adjusted William and took the letter. "Thank you, Jacob. I've been expecting this. Elizabeth promised to write after their move to Boston." "Will Aunt Elizabeth visit this summer?" Emma asked hopefully. She had a special bond with her aunt, who had visited the ranch 3 times since that first trip after Rose and Nathaniel's wedding. "I hope so, sweetheart," Rose replied. "Uncle David has a new position at the university there, but once they're settled, I'm sure they'll want to see you." As the family finished breakfast and dispersed to their various activities, the older children to their lessons with the new tutor, Jacob and Nathaniel to discuss the day's ranch work, Mrs. Winters to supervise the laundry, Rose settled in the sitting room with William. Emma stayed nearby, ostensibly practicing her letters, but mostly making faces at her baby brother. Rose opened Elizabeth's letter, smiling at her sister's familiar handwriting. The pages contained news of their new home, David's work at the university, and plans for a possible visit in late summer. The final paragraph caught Rose's attention particularly. "I passed through Fargo last month on our journey east. You would hardly recognize it now the railroad has transformed it into quite a bustling place. I confess, I felt some satisfaction in mentioning to several prominent citizens that my sister is now Mrs. Nathaniel Yates of the Circle Y Ranch, one of the most prosperous operations in the Dakota Territory. The expression on Mrs. Winters' face, the milliner, not your dear housekeeper, was particularly gratifying. Sometimes, dear sister, living well truly is the best revenge." Rose laughed softly, drawing Emma's curious gaze. "What's funny, Mama?" "Just something Aunt Elizabeth wrote." Rose folded the letter carefully. "She says to tell you she's bringing a special present when she visits." Emma's face lit up. "Really? What is it?" "If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise, would it?" Rose teased. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Rose shared the letter with Nathaniel as they sat on the porch enjoying the mild spring air. "So Fargo has grown," he commented after reading Elizabeth's words. "Not surprising with the railroad expansion." "Yes," Rose was thoughtful. "It seems a lifetime ago that we left there." Nathaniel took her hand. "Any regrets?" Rose looked at him, this man who had rescued her with simple kindness, who had seen value where others saw only shame, who had given her not just his name but his heart. She thought of their children, Emma, who called him Papa with complete conviction, James with his serious nature so like his father's, baby William with his sweet temperament. "Not a single one," she said truthfully. "Everything that happened led us here, to this life, this family. How could I regret any of it?" Nathaniel leaned over to kiss her gently. "I love you, Rose Yates, more today than the day we married." "And I love you," she replied, "my cowboy who saw a mother, not a mistake." As twilight deepened over the prosperous ranch they'd built together, Rose rested her head on her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the harshest judgments can lead to the greatest blessings, and that true love sees beyond circumstance to the heart that matters most.